Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the bank wire you sent 3 days ago, the one you needed to close a deal, pay a supplier, pay your rent, still hasn't arrived. Now imagine a world where that same transfer settles in 3 seconds, flat, no waiting, no correspondent banks, no mystery fees eaten out of the middle. Just done. Here's the thing most people don't realize, that world isn't science fiction. It isn't a white paper dream from some startup in a garage. The infrastructure for that world is already being built, and the institutions that run global finance are quietly lining up to use it. Today I want to take you inside something that most mainstream financial media refuses to talk about plainly: the quiet, methodical, almost invisible transformation of how money moves around the planet. And right at the center of it's a technology that has been dismissed, sued, mocked, and written off, only to keep expanding. Stick with me, because what's unfolding right now will reshape how every single person on Earth interacts with money, and most people won't even notice it's happening until it already has. Let's start with a number: $150 trillion. That's roughly how much money flows across international borders every single year in the form of business payments, remittances, trade settlements, and financial transfers. $150 trillion annually. Now here's the uncomfortable truth: a significant chunk of that money at any given moment is just sitting somewhere, trapped in what's called pre-funded nostro accounts, essentially pools of idle cash that banks spark in foreign countries just so they can process transfers quickly. Think about what that means. Banks around the world are locking up billions, some estimates put it above $27 billion globally, in frozen liquidity just to grease the wheels of an antiquated system. That capital isn't being invested, it isn't being lent out, it isn't earning anything meaningful. It's just sitting there as collateral for a payments infrastructure that was designed in the 1970s. Here's an analogy. Imagine every time you wanted to mail a letter, you had to first drive to the post office in every city your letter might pass through and leave a deposit of cash there just in case. That's essentially what cross-border banking looks like today. The system isn't broken in the sense that it doesn't work. It works. But it works the way a horse-drawn carriage works: technically functional, wildly inefficient by modern standards, and absolutely not built for the speed that global commerce now demands. That inefficiency has a cost. And the people who pay it most severely aren't hedge funds or Fortune 500 companies, they're small businesses in developing nations, migrant workers sending money home to their families, and entrepreneurs trying to access global markets from countries the legacy system treats as afterthoughts. This is the problem that a new generation of financial technology is trying to solve. And understanding that problem is the only way to understand why what's happening right now matters so deeply. In the last 18 months, something has changed in the tone of the conversation around digital assets, particularly around the rails that move value between currencies in real time. It used to be that when a traditional bank executive or a treasury official sat down for an interview, they'd speak about blockchain and crypto with careful skepticism. Polite dismissal. The kind of tone you use when you don't want to offend anyone but you're not planning to change anything. That tone is gone. What's replaced it is something far more significant: specificity. We're no longer hearing vague endorsements of blockchain technology. We're hearing treasury officials speak about the importance of the United States maintaining dominance in payment trails. We're hearing regulators openly discuss the need to bring digital asset activity into a clear, supervised framework, not to kill it but to own it. To make sure that when this technology becomes the global standard, it's American-built standards that define how it works, and that shift matters more than almost any price movement or market cap figure you could look at. Here's why. Throughout modern financial history, the country that controls the dominant payment infrastructure controls the flow of global commerce. SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, is a Belgian cooperative, but its dominance has been one of the key levers through which the United States has enforced financial sanctions and maintained dollar primacy worldwide. Now picture a world where real-time, blockchain-based payment rails become the new global standard. The question isn't whether that happens, the question is who builds the rails. If the United States sits on its hands while other nations develop and deploy their own digital payment infrastructure, the consequence isn't just a missed business opportunity. It's a structural erosion of the very mechanism that keeps the dollar at the center of global trade. That's not crypto enthusiasm talking, that's geopolitical arithmetic. Now let's get specific about where one particular company sits in all of this. Ripple didn't start as a cryptocurrency company. Most people don't know that. It started as a payments company, a company trying to solve a specific, practical, expensive problem. How do you move money between two people who use different currencies, different banks, different countries, in a way that's fast, cheap, and reliable? The original insight was essentially about trust networks. How can two parties who don't have a direct relationship settle a transaction through a chain of trusted intermediaries? It was a clever idea, and it evolved into something much larger when the team realized that a digital asset could function as a bridge, eliminating the need for pre-funded accounts entirely. Instead of a bank in Tokyo needing to hold a pool of frozen US dollars just in case someone in New York sends a wire, you use a neutral digital asset to facilitate the exchange in real time. The sender's currency converts to the bridge asset. The bridge asset converts to the recipient's currency. The whole thing settles in seconds. Nobody needs to keep billions locked in dormant accounts. What's remarkable about the last couple of years is not just that this technology works, it's that the regulatory environment has shifted in a way that allows major financial institutions to actually use it without fear of legal exposure. Legislation around stablecoin frameworks was a watershed moment. For the first time, regulated financial entities had a legal structure within which they could engage with digital payment instruments. The effect was almost immediate. Requests for proposals from banks started flowing in. Custody inquiries multiplied. Institutions that had been watching from the sidelines began making concrete moves. The numbers backed it up too. B2B stablecoin payment volume more than doubled in a single year. Digital assets under institutional custody expanded significantly. These aren't speculative projections, they're reported figures from companies operating inside this space in real time. And Ripple itself has been expanding its footprint aggressively, not just in technology but across the entire stack of financial infrastructure: custody, treasury management, prime brokerage functionality, payment infrastructure at both the institutional and retail level. What you're watching isn't a company chasing hype cycles. It's a company methodically acquiring the pieces of a full-service financial system, one that can operate end-to-end, from custody to settlement, under a single compliant roof. Let's talk about something that rarely gets discussed clearly: the regulatory chessboard. For years, one of the biggest friction points for institutional adoption of digital assets wasn't technical, it was legal. Compliance teams at major banks and asset managers aren't opposed to new technology. What they're opposed to is regulatory ambiguity. They need to be able to look a regulator in the eye and say, "This is what we're doing, here's the framework it operates under, here's our compliance posture." Without that clarity, adoption stalls. Regardless of how good the underlying technology is. It doesn't matter if your payment trail is 1,000 times faster and 90% cheaper if using it exposes your institution to legal liability. The clarity that's emerging now: licensing frameworks, stablecoin legislation, defined regulatory pathways, is essentially unlocking a dam. Every license granted in a major financial jurisdiction is a signal to every institution in that market: the door is open. Singapore's MAS granting a major payments institution license, BitLicense frameworks in New York. These aren't just compliance checkboxes, they're trust signals that cascade through the entire financial ecosystem. There's also something fascinating happening at the infrastructure level. When you see any regulator decide to run their own node on an open, permissionless ledger, that's not a casual IT decision. That's an institution choosing to participate in the network directly, to verify transactions themselves, to have a seat at the table of a distributed financial infrastructure. That's the kind of move you make when you believe something is going to matter for a long time. And here's the piece that often gets lost. Open, permissionless ledgers don't require anyone's permission to use. That's the entire point. A regulator doesn't call up a technology company and ask if they're allowed to run a node. They just run one. That decentralization isn't a bug, it's the feature that makes the technology trustworthy at a global scale. Step all the way back for a moment. Every major transition in the global monetary system has been preceded by a period of tension between the old infrastructure and the new. The Bretton Woods system didn't emerge from a calm, orderly planning process, it emerged from the wreckage of the Great Depression and World War II, when it became undeniable that the old monetary order couldn't hold. The question people rarely ask is, what does a monetary transition look like when it happens without catastrophe? When it happens incrementally? When it happens through legislation rather than revolution? When institutions adopt new rails not because they're forced to but because the economic logic becomes impossible to argue with? That might be exactly what we're watching. Not a dramatic overnight reset, but a slow, steady, deliberate migration of value movement from aging infrastructure to something fundamentally faster, cheaper, and more accessible. The most significant financial developments in history rarely announce themselves loudly at the moment they're happening. The shift from gold-backed currencies to fiat money happened over decades. The displacement of physical stock certificates by electronic records happened so gradually that most people never noticed the transition. They just woke up one day in the new world. We may be in the middle of one of those transitions right now. The paperwork is being filed, the licenses are being granted, the institutions are sending off VPS, the legislation is being drafted and debated. And somewhere in the background, value is moving across borders in seconds, invisibly, cheaply powered by infrastructure that most people have never heard of and don't yet understand. Here's what I want to leave you with. The story of how money moves is never really about technology, it's about trust. Every payment system that has ever dominated global commerce from gold coins to swift wires did so because enough of the right institutions decided to trust it. What's different about this moment is that trust is being formalized through regulation, through licensing, through legislative clarity. The technology proved it could work. Now the system is deciding whether to let it scale. The adoption curve for transformative financial infrastructure is always longer than optimists hope and shorter than skeptics expect. The people building inside this space have been playing a long, patient game, acquiring licenses, expanding infrastructure, forming partnerships, waiting for the regulatory environment to catch up. To the technology, that environment is catching up quickly now. Whether you're an investor trying to understand where the world is going, a developer building on this infrastructure, or just someone who sends an international wire and wonders why it still takes 3 days, pay attention to what's being built. The next era of how money moves is not coming. It's here. Most people just haven't noticed yet. That's your update. Think carefully. Do your own research and keep watching the rails, because whoever controls them controls the future of finance.